3,000 years ago in the ancient Near East, a woman without a husband, sons, or land faced absolute vulnerability. Famine was a constant threat, and social safety nets were tied almost entirely to male protectors. Naomi experienced this reality firsthand. She and her family fled a famine in Bethlehem for the neighboring country of Moab. But over the next 10 years, her husband died, followed by both of her adult sons. Naomi was left entirely destitute in a foreign land. In her own words, she was empty. Confronted with starvation, Naomi made a logical calculation. She decided to go back to Bethlehem to die, but she advised her 2 Moabite daughters-in-law to stay behind. If they returned to their own mothers' houses, they could find new Moabite husbands and secure their own survival. One of the daughters-in-law, Orpah, listened to reason. She tearfully kissed Naomi goodbye and went back to her people. But the other daughter-in-law, Ruth, refused to leave. Defying all logic and self-preservation, she tied her fate to a bitter, impoverished older woman, declaring that Naomi's people would be her people and Naomi's God her God. This diagram breaks down the specific Hebrew word for what Ruth did here, hesed. It translates to a fierce, selfless, covenantal loving-kindness. It is an act of extreme loyalty that goes far beyond any basic legal or social obligation. By crossing that border, Ruth became an inhabitant of Bethlehem. But social status didn't come with the change in geography. They arrived in Judah as 2 widows with no food, no money, and no male protector, vulnerable outsiders in a land that owed them nothing. They arrived in Bethlehem right at the beginning of the barley harvest. To keep them from starving, Ruth immediately volunteered to go out into the agricultural fields to look for food. Ancient Israelite law required landowners to leave the edges of their fields unharvested and to let dropped grain remain on the ground so the poor could glean it. Ruth ended up doing this back-breaking work in a field belonging to a wealthy relative of Naomi's named Boaz. Boaz noticed her. When he found out she was the Moabite widow who had sacrificed her own security for Naomi, he responded with his own act of hesed. He ordered his workers to intentionally drop extra bundles of grain for her to find, and he offered her physical protection among his own female servants. This was a highly unusual response. As a Moabite, Ruth belonged to a nation that was a historic enemy of Israel. Foreigners in ancient times were routinely exploited or chased away, yet Boaz invited her to eat at his own table. This cycle of reciprocal kindness, loyalty answering loyalty, changed the momentum of the story. For the first time since leaving Moab, Ruth and Naomi weren't just scavenging for their next meal. They were seeing the first signs of a path toward a stable future. When Ruth brought the massive amount of gleaned barley home, Naomi recognized Boaz's name. She realized he held a specific legal status in their extended family. He was a goel, a kinsman-redeemer. We can see how this works on this flowchart. The goel was an ancient legal safety net. If an Israelite family fell into total poverty and had to sell their ancestral land, a close male relative, the kinsman-redeemer, had the right and obligation to buy that land back, restoring the property to the family line. But Naomi's situation involved a second legal layer, known as yibum, or levirate marriage. Because Naomi's sons died childless, the redeemer purchasing the land would also need to marry the widow. The firstborn son of that union would carry on the dead husband's name and inherit the redeemed property. Boaz saw Ruth's loyalty to Naomi as a mirror of his own values. He publicly praised her character and promised to do whatever was necessary to secure her future, even though a kinsman-redeemer's duty was expensive. But there was a catch. Another male relative lived in Bethlehem who was closer in bloodline to Naomi's husband, meaning he held the first legal right to the land. To resolve this, Boaz went to the city gate. In the ancient Near East, the city gate functioned as the local courthouse and public square. There, he sat down with the elders and officially confronted the closer relative. Initially, the closer relative agreed to buy the land. But the moment Boaz explained that the purchase required marrying Ruth the Moabite and raising up an heir for the deceased, the man backed out. Doing so would mean spending his own money to buy land that would eventually go to Ruth's child, financially splitting his own family's inheritance. To finalize his refusal, the nearer relative engaged in a traditional legal ceremony. He took off his sandal and handed it to Boaz. This public handshake officially relinquished his right of redemption, transferring it directly to Boaz. The rigid property laws of ancient Israel could have easily left Naomi and Ruth destitute. Instead, Boaz chose to use those laws voluntarily, absorbing the financial cost to rescue an outsider through a legal framework designed for compassion. With the legal path cleared, Boaz purchased Naomi's family land and married Ruth. Soon after, Ruth gave birth to a son named Obed. The women of Bethlehem, who had watched Naomi return empty and bitter, now celebrated her restoration. They declared to Naomi that her daughter-in-law's fierce love was worth more to her than 7 sons. This family tree traces the macro-historical consequences of Obed's birth. Starting with Boaz and Ruth, a line drops to a node for their son, Obed. Obed had a son named Jesse, who grew up to become the father of King David. Israel's most revered king, the man who would unite the tribes and secure the borders, was the direct great-grandson. The lineage of David suggests that the stability of a kingdom isn't built on pure bloodlines or military might alone. The Book of Ruth argues that the story of a nation is actually shaped by hesed, those small, selfless acts of loving kindness that occur on the margins, long before a king is ever born.